background, and then maybe we can go in a little bit more depth as we progress?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm super jet lagged, by the way. I
We
arrived
both
from
came
Switzerland,
from
so I'm kind
Europe.
of amazed I'm awake, even. So chain abstraction. Right, well, for us, it is all about a vision of abstracting away the current complexity in blockchain environments, particularly multi-chain blockchain environments, where right now, users need to be maintaining multiple sets of private keys, multiple wallet clients. They need to be thinking about bridging and managing gas fees, all of this kind of stuff, which is a real barrier for adoption on the user side. And I like to think, could my grandma do this stuff? And right now, absolutely not. I mean, she's actually pretty tech savvy for a 98-year-old, but she couldn't handle this. And then on the developer side, right now, when developers are choosing where to build, they have to make a bunch of trade-offs, and they're subject to lots of different constraints because we're in a pretty modular state and a fragmented state in Web3 right now, and that means that resources like users, like liquidity, like particular kind of types of dev tools, for example, are kind of siloed in different places, and so when you make a choice about where to build, you typically are sacrificing one or more of those things, and our aim is therefore to try and unify all of these different disparate silos together, kind of like a connective tissue, so that developers don't have to make those types of trade-offs anymore.
Thank you. And maybe we could break down a bit more what the issue is here that you're trying to solve. Where are the specific pain points, and how does chain abstraction / NEAR fit into that?
Sure. So maybe starting with thinking about the current state of the industry, and I mentioned just in the previous response that we're in a very kind of modular state right now. We have a bunch of disparate ecosystems, but then we also have projects that have actually been breaking up the blockchain layers themselves, settlement, execution, data availability, into separate kind of modular offerings, which is great for scalability, but it creates that fragmentation that I mentioned, both for users and also for developers. And in our view, if we want this technology to be being used by billions of people, we can't have the infrastructure being a barrier to adoption. So what we're trying to do is just remove as many barriers to adoption as possible, and also at the same time help all of us as members of this industry collaborate a little bit more effectively together. I think tribalism is something that is typically can be quite fierce in our industry, and I think it is in a lot of nascent industries in general. People feel like they really have to have sharp elbows, really competing over a small slice of the pie. But actually, our view is if we can move past that mindset, but also help create the technical substrate that makes collaboration easier, it'll be better for the industry as a whole.
And what makes NEAR specifically the best to facilitate this?
Well, that's a great question, and maybe I'll start at a higher level, not thinking NEAR specific, but just more kind of the general technical features and innovations that you would need to enable the chain abstraction future. And so the first thing is, what we need to have is a unified security layer between different blockchain environments. And by that, I mean, if you think about the state of the industry prior to zero knowledge, for example, right, you would need to rely from a security perspective on a bunch of decentralized validators to maintain the state. Whereas now with zero knowledge, you can actually, you can prove the state of a particular chain, on a single server, right? So you do not need to be relying on disparate groups of decentralized validators in all cases, which means that for developers who historically would have had to choose between either operating on a pre-existing shared large chain infrastructure or even building their own chain, which is expensive and complicated, now they can actually just spin up a chain running on a single server, and they can use zero knowledge proof to actually publish the proof on another piece of blockchain infrastructure. So that's the unified security layer. We then think about what we call the identity layer, and this is the ability for users through a single account to actually transact and control multiple addresses in multiple different blockchain environments. And so in the near ecosystem, we're working on something called account abstraction, which productizes that vision. And in practice, that means that from your near account, you can actually sign transactions and control assets in a whole bunch of different blockchain environments. Like, so, you know, if you've got Bitcoin you want to move around, you've got stuff on Ethereum, whatever, you can do that from your near account, which we think is super powerful because that's one of the biggest barriers to adoption right now. And then the last piece at a high level is what we call the experience layer, which is effectively from a user interface perspective, do I need to be jumping in and out of different environments, different applications? Am I going to centralized exchanges? Am I going to DEXs? Am I going to different dApps? Or can I do all of this from the same user interface? And we think that it needs to be the same user interface because right now, Web2 experiences kind of do that for you, right? And it's the convenience and the ease of use is kind of what's helped Web2 scale and be so successful. And if we want to match that and we want to get to the same levels of adoption, we have to kind of meet them on the same terms from a kind of convenience and usability perspective. But then talking specifically about near, and I'll caveat all of this by saying, well, two things. One, we view chain abstraction as a collective effort. So there are lots of places that chain abstraction is being worked on, and we're just one of them. And we think that's great because we want lots of people trying to solve this problem because it's so important for the industry. The second caveat I will give is that I know my way around the technology, but I'm not deeply technical. I used to be a lawyer. I'm a reformed lawyer. But I'll do my best to walk the group through the kind of different technical pillars in the near ecosystem that we're working on right now. So there are three pillars, basically. The first is what we call account abstraction, which is actually a native feature of near accounts since the protocol was launched back in 2020. And what that basically means is that near accounts map to human-readable addresses. So Lila.near, Chris.near, for example, rather than a public key hash. So effectively, accounts are like smart contract containers on near, and you can put as many different keys as you want within that smart contract, and those keys can have different permissions for different things, which creates quite a versatile account environment. And it's also typically gives you more security and granularity as well. And one of the cool features that we launched last year that was kind of a stepping stone to this vision is the onboarding experience called FastAuth, which basically allows users to create a near account in less than a second, and it's secured using biometric passkeys, and it basically matches that Web2 account creation user experience. It's super fast, it's super slick, and all of the blockchain stuff happens under the hood, and users don't have to know that it's even there. And again, that's kind of part of the vision of chain abstraction. So that near account model is one pillar. There are two others. One is chain signatures, and that is the ability through MPC nodes in the near network for near accounts to control and sign transactions on other remote accounts in other blockchain ecosystems. And that's the really big innovation. It's also the most complicated piece of the puzzle as well. But again, for us, that's how you get to that state of one account to do all of your Web3 stuff. And that's the sort of simplification piece. And then the last component is what we're calling intent relayers. And this component is designed to effectively transfer and execute based on the intent of users and abstracting away the underlying complexity. So when you traditionally transact on a multi-chain basis, like I mentioned, you've got to manage all of these different keys and wallets and bridging and all this kind of stuff, gas fees in different native tokens, which can be super complicated, right? Even I find it difficult sometimes, or I find it so tedious that I just don't bother because it takes too long. And so the intent relayer, what it does is it helps to eliminate particularly the management of gas and the kind of exchange of tokens on the destination chain. It kind of captures that process. And so for us in V1 of account aggregation, what happens is that the near accounts, rather than mapping directly to these remote addresses on different blockchains, they actually map to the intent relayer, and then that relayer then controls the remote accounts underneath, and the relayer I guess it kind of processes all that transactional complexity on behalf of the user. And again, I think if you can't solve that, then again, you're not really giving users that seamless multi-chain experience.
You made the point of, we spoke a little bit about user experience. I'm wondering if you can compare the way that this would look to something that we may use already in Web 2. I know you said you're going to be able to move assets from whether it be Bitcoin, Ethereum, or your near tokens.
Yeah.
How would that look in terms of the app?
It's a great question. So I think, well, first of all, that would mean that, right now, if you want to transact on a multi-chain basis, you're coming in and out of a bunch of different application environments. And that's not just wallets, but it's also sometimes, centralized exchanges if you want to do kind of transacting in real time on a multi-chain basis. Right now, that's just about the only place you can do it effectively. So in a chain abstraction world, you would do everything from one place, first of all, which is great. Secondly, you would not need to think necessarily, unless you wanted to, and sometimes there's good reasons for it, but generally you would prefer not to have to bridge assets at any time. Because bridging is a real pain in the backside. It's also a huge security risk, and it's also quite expensive. So now, because you're able to control these remote addresses in these assets on their native chains, you don't need to worry about trying to bridge and wrap and all that kind of stuff.
But the user isn't going to see that back-end stuff. I just see that my assets are moving.
So for example, maybe like to give a use case example, let's say I own a Bored Ape NFT on Ethereum, right? And I want to sell that on OpenSea. I would do all of that from my Near account. I'd see my Bored Ape NFT in my Near account, in my kind of wallet experience on the Near blockchain. I would be able to set up the sale, set the sale price, press execute, and then all of the components, and there's quite a few steps that happen under the hood for that. Like you've got to consider preparing the ETH payload for the costs of transacting on Ethereum, for example. And that all happens under the hood. And as far as the user is concerned, I've sold my Bored Ape, I've got my ETH profits, and it's all just happened in one place.
Okay.
And we think that's like an enormous user experience change from what exists today.
Absolutely. So I think I understand from a user perspective what chain abstraction means, but if I were a developer, how does it benefit me?
Okay, well, lots of different ways. So let's take, for example, a feature of the Near ecosystem right now. So one of the things we've been pretty good at, I think partly because we've always, since the protocol's inception, we've been trying to abstract away complexity, like make adoption easy. So we've managed to attract a lot of monthly active users to the ecosystem. We have about 14.5 million monthly active users in the Near ecosystem right now. And for developers not in the Near ecosystem, that pool of users is really valuable potentially, right? That's potentially like a gold mine of user traffic and user interactions, new customers, all of this kind of stuff. And with chain signatures and account aggregation, if I'm building a dApp in a different blockchain environment, let's say Solana, what I can do is in my wallet selector page, I can add sign in with Near, and then my users can actually, my project then gets access to all of the users in the Near ecosystem as a result, right? Which is super powerful. But the same goes for things like access to liquidity too, right? So if I've got, I don't need to think about picking an environment because it happens to have liquidity for the use case that I need. I can access it from anywhere now, which means that I don't need to compromise and I don't need to think, well, I'd rather build over there because I think the developer toolkit is much more efficient and effective for me, right? But all the users are over there and all the liquidity's here. And so how do I kind of square that circle and deal with the trade-offs? I don't have to do that anymore.
Okay, great. So what is this? You mentioned briefly that this might remove the necessity for bridges. What does this then mean for bridging?
Well, it doesn't eliminate bridging entirely. There are sometimes good reasons why you might want to bridge assets. So for example, like Ethereum is not a bad example. Ethereum is pretty expensive to move around on Ethereum. And if you just wrap it and put it on another chain, you can then move it around much more cheaply and efficiently and sometimes even more quickly. But in general terms, And I think if you speak to folks, that are deep in the industry and deep in the ecosystem, bridging is, like I said, a real pain in the backside, and bridges are always just terrible user experiences, and typically also they're massive liability vectors. Like, they're where, if hackers are on the prowl, that's what they tend to focus on. They tend to be really big honeypots. They have lots of liquidity trapped in them. So again, because you're not needing to worry about pulling assets from their canonical native chain, you can just move them around. You're controlling them from over here, but they're staying in their local environment. You don't need to worry about bridging anymore, and that makes it faster and also cheaper and more secure to do the transactions that would otherwise take you like 15 steps and 2 hours and cost a lot in gas fees and exchange fees and all of that kind of stuff.
Okay, great. In terms of interest and adoption for this, I know it's fairly early stages, but what have you experienced and what are you seeing so far?
Yeah, so we had our chain abstraction summit yesterday, and I don't know if any of you went, but we actually had one of the first demos of chain signatures in action. So Sweat economy, which is one of the biggest projects in our ecosystem, which is a move to earn protocol. You take steps, you earn tokens, which is great. They actually demonstrated a feature where users can transact and settle on Binance Smart Chain from their Sweat wallet, which is a near account-based model.
Okay.
And we have a few other projects. So we have Cosmos Kaiching, which is like a shopping loyalty environment. And they're actually a really interesting case because they moved from a Web2 payment rail structure, so Stripe, to the Near protocol to save on transaction fees, because Stripe charges a pretty high transaction fee, and also is not particularly fast relative to the Near protocol. So they're exploring chain signatures to broaden access for their user base to other ecosystems, other liquidity, other opportunities. And we also have Play Ember, which is a hyper-casual mobile gaming project. They have millions of monthly active users as well, and they're also hoping to broaden the experience environment for their users by implementing this technology.
Cool. What sort of challenges have you faced when trying to push this forward and get people interested? Have you noticed that there's competition? I know you mentioned earlier that this isn't a competitive thing. Everyone should be on board, and it's like you play for each other. But how does that look from your side of things?
Sure. Well, I think, first of all, just from a technical implementation perspective, like this stuff is pretty hard. And people have been trying to figure it out for a while, although, as I said, we feel like a lot of different pieces are coming together in quite an exciting way right now. And we do have stuff that's live on testnet. We have documentation around account abstraction and chain signatures that, if anyone's interested, I encourage to go look at it. We've got some Telegram groups with developers that are specifically thinking about and working on these topics, which is great. And these are people from loads of different ecosystems, which is amazing. So the technical side is hard, but we feel solvable. I think the bigger challenge, interestingly, has been helping people change the way they think about operating in Web3. Like from this tribal mindset of my chain is the best chain and I'm competing with all of you to let's work together to solve this collective problem. And it's genuinely mutually beneficial. Like if we connect all of these things together, it's a better environment, like I said, for users and developers everywhere. It doesn't matter where you're building, doesn't matter where your users are. It's a better experience. And if we want Web3 to be being used by billions of people around the world, which is definitely our aspiration, we think you have to have this stuff.
And do you think that other chains have that perspective?
I think I think it depends on who you ask, right? I think some folks absolutely, and definitely we've noticed a desire, perhaps during the previous bear market, and as we move into this new cycle, of folks just wanting to be more open and collaborative in general, because they recognize that rising tide lifts all boats, and we might as well help each other try and be more successful. But then equally, and this, by the way, includes folks even in the Near ecosystem, there are folks who kind of say, well, hang on a minute, I want to bring these people to build on the Near protocol. I don't want them to be over in Solana or whatever, and we have to try and help them view those other ecosystems not as competitors, but as collaborators. And that's, like, being honest, it's just going to take time.
But you can see that it's improving from where it was.
I think so, and I think the use cases help, because it feels a little bit magical to kind of go from this painful user experience to just like a couple of clicks and it all just happens under the hood. Like really, it feels magical. It feels similar to how it feels when you use these things, and everything is just so seamless, and you're kind of even I'm still occasionally astounded by how easy or how kind of magical even the user experience can be. And I think we're just beginning to have the building blocks to begin to replicate that in Web3, and that will just help people see the benefit.
Wonderful. That's all we have time for, but thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate
Pleasure.
it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.